Hey everyone. In my first video, I talked a lot about longevity, life extension, and defeating disease. As we all know, these are things humanity has been unable to achieve thus far. They're essentially science fiction, or at least they can come off as such. Rather than leave the topic of life extension just like that, one standalone video that's little more than wishful thinking, I wanted to make another video going over what we know about longevity, the current state of various research, and why I thought it was something feasibly achievable in our time in the first place. This is that video. Full disclaimer, I'm no subject matter expert in this area, and there are way better resources out there than this video. It's just a topic area that interests me, and for someone who might not have seen any other resource, this overview is better than nothing. Let's begin. So before we get into the current progress made as concerns the field of anti-aging, let's start with a working definition of what aging is. Multiple sources I have seen characterize aging as a phenomenon of physics, not biology. That is to say, the same processes that wear down a car or any other form of machinery over the course of its use and operation are the same processes that are at work that cause the body to deteriorate as we age. The two processes can be considered similar or analogous to one another. Ever put together a computer and the CPU fan was spick and span at first, but it started looking terrible, when you checked back a little bit later? All this dust and particulate matter began to accrue and clog the fan over the course of the computer's operation. Or perhaps you had a car that was running well enough at first, but eventually over time, as you kept driving it, something went wrong. Maybe it was the engine, or the tires, or a filter, or some other part. These are all components of a car necessary for its function, and these components exhibit wear and tear in their own way as they see continued use and operation, based on their particular structure and function within the car. If a necessary component breaks down, the whole machine may break down. These facts that govern a car or plane or any other machine can also be applied to the human body. Aubrey de Grey, someone who works in this area, defines aging as the accumulation of damage that the machine does to itself throughout its operation as a side effect of the normal operation of the machine. So in this context, damage refers to changes in the structure of the body that are not just automatically reversed by the body's built-in machinery and recovery works. Metabolism refers to the normal ongoing operation of the body which causes damage. The normal ongoing operation of the body causes damage. Over time, that accumulating damage manifests itself in the form of a pathology of some kind. A pathology which, depending on the component, could prove fatal. So then, the goal of anti-aging is to either slow down the arrow, to reduce the damage being caused to us over time, or to reduce damage that's already accrued within us. So, damage is occurring all over the body as metabolism continues. Let's go over some types of damage occurring and research and solutions currently being developed to counteract them. The first one I want to go over is senescent cells. The cells in our body, as you may know, divide. When they do so, they copy their DNA. But the way that it works, some DNA is lost at the ends. Losing DNA or altering it can cause problems. So to compensate for this, cells have long DNA segments called telomeres that act as a buffer against losing important DNA. An analogy commonly cited is the hard tips of shoelaces. After every cell division, the telomeres get shorter and shorter. When the telomeres get lost, the cells undergo programmed cell death. That's how it's supposed to work anyway. The thing is, this final step doesn't always happen. Some cells run out of telomeres but don't die. They instead linger around and harm tissue around them and are associated with disease. The reason they don't die is because they are lacking a protein. The older you get, the more of them you get inside of you. Destroying these junk cells without harming healthy ones would eliminate the damage and pathologies that come about as a result of this type of accumulating damage. One study set about trying to do just that. Mice were genetically modified to become capable of destroying their senescent cells at a much higher rate. These mice lived 30% longer and in better health than non-modified mice. This is excellent news for the genetically modified. What about the rest of us? Remember there are proteins senescent cells were deficient in? Well, in a 2016 study, mice were given an injection of this very protein, and it killed 80% of senescent cells while causing almost no harm to healthy cells. Some scientists and companies are working now to translate this treatment from mice to being applicable to humans. So, moving on, we have NAD+. So, throughout the general metabolic process, there's a lot going on. Cells need to go through maintenance. They need to be destroyed, cleaned up. Some of the cells need to be, rebuilt. As we age, this process becomes less effective, less efficient, and things begin to get crumpled. They start breaking down. Things that need to be removed are removed slower. Works are getting gummed up. The coenzyme NAD+ tells cells to better maintain themselves. But as we age, we lose NAD+. After age 50, we only have half the same amount of NAD+ we had when we were 20 years old. In 2016, a chemical cocktail put together by researchers was used on mice and shown to boost their NAD+ levels. The mice were observed to have an increase in skin, brain, and muscle stem cells, and their lifespans on average increased a small amount. NAD+, according to some, may be the very first anti-aging human-administered life extension drug. So another thing scientists have researched is DAF2. Scientists recently conducted an experiment on the C. elegans worm, a species of worm that lives for 14 days on average. In this experiment, scientists modified a gene, DAF2, that regulates insulin and is associated with nutrient absorption. As one scientist described it, this procedure tricked the worm's body into thinking it was fasting. Putting the worm into that fasting state induced an alternative metabolic state that is less damaging and more conducive to a longer lifespan. This change resulted in a doubling of the worm's lifespan. In fruit flies, where this experiment was repeated, their lives were also doubled. Mice saw a 50% increase in their life expectancy. So following this finding, funding of new research skyrocketed. As one scientist put it, if we could modify one gene in the body and get this much results, then we're in business. So moving right along, we have stem cells next. Stem cells are extremely useful to the body because they are incredibly versatile and have the ability to adapt to become what the body needs them to become. Among other things, they can introduce copies of fresh, new cells into an area of the body, or secrete chemicals that aid the function of older, pre-existing cells, or otherwise reinvigorate them. As we age, the amount of stem cells in our body decreases, and our health suffers as a result of this. In recent years, there have been studies conducted to use stem cells to improve the health of aging animals. One study involved injecting a baby mouse's stem cells directly into the brain of a middle-aged mouse. This experiment improved brain function and allowed the middle-aged mouse to live 10% longer on average. Another study of a similar nature was conducted, where mice embryonic stem cells were injected directly into the heart tissue of a middle-aged mouse. This resulted in improved heart function and an ability to do more exercise. This is, of course, something done on mice so far, not humans. So there are a variety of processes at work that contribute to the damage we accumulate throughout our lives, and research is being done to counteract that damage. The 5 oversimplified rundowns we just went over are a small part of the whole picture that goes into anti-aging. Now, there are additional technologies and breakthroughs that may not necessarily fall under categories of life extension, but I believe are worth mentioning here as well. So, let's go over them. One of them we have is organ growing and the vacanti mouse. In 2018, using a combination of 3D printing and cultured cells, scientists in China grew a perfectly compatible ear in a lab and successfully grafted it onto a patient. This is just the start. We may be able to grow more complicated organs in the future. There's another one involving cloning. That's Dolly the sheep. In 1996, the first mammal ever was cloned using a process known as nuclear transfer. We may be able to clone more complex animals in the future, even humans. Maybe someday this process can be used to produce a supply of embryonic stem cells from an individual's own DNA. If you remember, we could use stem cells to replace other tissues in our body. And a third area I'd like to go over is organ transplanting. As we already know, organ transplanting is a common occurrence, but in the future, we may be able to perform brain or spinal transplants successfully as well. When we consider how far we've come concerning gene mapping and gene editing, we potentially may be able to clone a disease-free version of an individual and transplant them to that healthy version of themselves. There's definitely more out there than this. CRISPR technology is another area showing promise as well. But this is all just a cursory glance of some of the stuff I've come across in this area. Rather than go into any more detail, let's take a moment to talk about the future. It bears worth mentioning, all the contemporary achievements of modern innovations have come about in a relatively recent and short period of time. Additionally, these developments have occurred with relatively small and inadequate funding and limited attention. One could argue much more progress could be made in this area with more researchers and more resources. Unlike a lot of people think, progress is not just a result of time. Progress in the same amount of time can be different depending on how much effort is put into a specific goal. A second point which should be factored is the unique point in time humanity finds itself in today versus other periods of time. The point I'm trying to convey here is nobody in 1980 was expecting the year 2000 to look the way it ended up looking. The same is true for the years 2000 and 2020. The pace of innovation and technology is so much different today than it once was. For literally thousands of years, we fought each other with swords and spears. Boats didn't fire projectiles, we used them as battering rams. Nothing much changed. And this was the case for hundreds of years. If you were born anywhere between or even before ancient Greece, with Alexander the Great, through the rise and fall of Rome, all the way to the fall of Constantinople in 1450, what you did when you conducted naval warfare is ram your boats into other boats. My point being, if you were born in ancient Rome, you might as well say, well, there's nothing much we could really do here. Nothing much has changed in the last 100 years, and nothing much will change in the next 100 years. These same sensibilities just don't hold up today in the modern era of innovation. Finally, the last point that bears consideration is on that of causality. There are many moving parts that go into determining when we are able to make scientific breakthroughs. Things can often happen as the result of a confluence of events. The same causality that goes into enabling an NBA player to be open for a shot as a result of a distraction elsewhere, or a stay-at-home spouse holding things down home side so that money can flow into the household through the breadwinner. All these events add up to producing the reality we experience. We're so interlinked, we're kind of like ants in that way, albeit, intelligent ants. That is to say, everyone could have a role to play, big and small, that goes into determining when such scientific breakthroughs take place. The brain is a complex organ, and researchers and funding going into the slowing of its decay are lacking. Nonetheless, someone or some organization choosing to begin work in this area now could potentially make all the difference. And that's only one example of causality at work. There are infinite amount of permutations.
I want to be clear about something here, guys. Unlike some of my other videos, which are relatively grounded like the social contract video, this one is very theoretical. We could pool our resources and be optimal and efficient and still not achieve this. We may simply not be within reach of that technological threshold. My only contention here is, because of the fast-paced era of change and innovation we live in now, it's arguably the first time in history we'd actually have a shot to pull it off. And I'd rather spend $800 billion a year towards programs of social upliftment than on weapons of destruction. If you watch this video to the end, I really appreciate that. These are some of the reasons why I believed longevity may be feasible in our lifetime. Many thanks for watching.